Did you just get your green card? Well, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the things you need to know now that you are a permanent resident of the United States. I'm going to be talking about the traps that you need to make sure you don't fall into and that you keep your permanent residency and do not lose it. I am Lilian Chukwurah. I am the owner and attorney at Lilly Legal, where we help our clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. First thing you want to do now that you are a permanent resident is go ahead and make sure that your Social Security is up to date. Okay, make sure that it shows that you are a permanent resident, which means you do not need a work authorization anymore, right? So you want to make sure your Social Security card is updated to show that. Also, if you have filed an I-9 with your employer while you had your work permit, now that you have your permanent residency, you want to go ahead and update that I-9 with your employer. Your green card, your permanent resident card, serves as your travel permit, okay? You are allowed to travel outside of the U.S. and be able to come back as a permanent resident of the United States. Now, let's talk about one of the traps when it comes to traveling outside of the U.S. As a permanent resident, you do have the right to travel outside of the U.S. However, you need to make sure that you are not staying outside of the U.S. for too long, okay? If you are staying outside of the U.S. for 6 months or longer, you are putting yourself in a position where an officer could look at you at the airport and say, well, we don't think you wanted to stay in the U.S. anyway, and we're going to refuse you entry or put you in deportation proceedings. So to avoid that, make sure you're not staying outside the U.S. for 6 months or more. If you do plan on staying outside of the U.S. for, let's say, a year or longer, you want to make sure that you're getting something called a reentry permit. And you apply for that in the U.S. before you travel, because that's just the requirements. You may need to do biometrics. So once you file your application while you're physically in the U.S., you can leave. But if you're scheduled for a biometrics, you need to come back, do your biometrics, and then leave again. When that reentry permit is approved, it gives you the right to stay outside of the U.S. for up to 2 years, right? Up to 2 years without risking your permanent residency. That's really the goal here. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing, that you are not putting your permanent residency at risk. If when you applied for your green card, you received a 2-year conditional residency, you need to make sure that before that 2 years is up, 90 days before that 2 years is up, that you are applying to remove the conditions with an I-751, not an I-90. An I-90 is for someone that has a 10-year card that's expiring to get a new one. You want to remove your conditions because you have a 2-year card. So make sure that you are filing the correct forms and including supporting documents for that form. Because when you don't file the correct forms, USCIS can, again, take away your permanent residency. Now, let's talk about the different ways that you could lose your residency, okay? This is really important. If you are in a position where you could potentially be losing your residency, you want to make sure that you pay attention to this. You can lose your green card by abandonment, okay? If you abandon your permanent residency, if you decide to live outside of the U.S. permanently, you take a permanent job outside of the U.S., right? You take a job that required you to live outside of the U.S. You fail to file your tax returns. These are things that you are doing that is signaling to the U.S. government that you do not want to remain a permanent resident. Now, let's talk about factors that USCIS or the officer at the airport, the U.S. government in general, is going to look at when determining if you have abandoned your residency. And these include the amount of time that you spend outside of the U.S. versus in the U.S., right? Are you taking short trips outside of the U.S. that clearly shows that it's a vacation and you're coming back to your home in the U.S.? Or are you just staying in the U.S. for a month out of the year? That is not good, right? That shows that, no, your home is outside of the U.S. and you're coming to the U.S. for vacation. If you're only spending a month out of the year in the U.S., okay? They will look at your ties to the U.S. Are you working in the U.S.? Do you have family in the U.S.? Are you filing U.S. tax returns? What are you doing to show that you have ties to the U.S.? Do you have a home in the U.S., right? An actual home in the U.S. Now, do you consider the U.S. your home, but do you have a physical location where you consider your home in the U.S.? Are you maintaining, bank accounts, investment accounts in the U.S.? Are you keeping a car in the U.S. that you're paying the registration and maintaining that vehicle? Do you own property in the U.S. or do you only own property outside of the U.S.? What are your reasons for your travels outside of the U.S.? If you are outside of the U.S. because you got sick and you're not able to travel, your doctor told you cannot travel back to the U.S. until you have cleared this infection or whatever it is, and it took this amount of time, and that's why you stayed outside of the U.S. for 6 months or more, that's okay because you have medical records to back that up. But if it's just that you decided to take a contract job out there and, live there while you work outside of the U.S., you don't pay taxes, you don't do anything to show that you want to maintain your residency in the U.S., well, that's going to look very badly for you if the government tries to take away your residency. One thing I will mention is if your job wants to transfer you to a location outside of the U.S., please speak with an immigration lawyer first. You may qualify to apply for citizenship. Once you're a U.S. citizen, none of this matters, right? You can live wherever you want in the world, you'll still be a U.S. citizen. But until then, you have to make sure you maintain your residence in the U.S. Other things that can affect your status, right, that can make you lose your status is criminal convictions. Even minor drug-related offenses can take away your green card. If you are charged with a felony, talk to an immigration lawyer. Make sure that your criminal attorney is communicating with your immigration lawyer to make sure that if you're taking a plea deal, that it is not going to turn out to be a conviction for immigration purposes that can then affect your ability to maintain your residency. Again, you worked hard to get your permanent residency. You don't want to lose it. So make sure that you stay out of trouble. Helping someone illegally or fraudulently enter the U.S. can also affect your residency. Engaging in anything that sabotages the U.S. government, terrorist activity, that affects your ability to remain a permanent resident and your ability to apply for citizenship as well. Next up, taxation. You have to file taxes, okay? This is a requirement. Unless you are legally not required to file taxes, meaning you did not make enough money, you did not meet the legal threshold to file a tax return, those are the only times that you as a permanent resident do not have to file a tax return. Talk to your CPA, talk to your tax person before you decide that you do not need to file a tax return. And just to be extra clear, as a U.S. permanent resident, you are tax resident, okay? You cannot file your taxes as a non-resident. You are a tax resident. So you have to make sure that you are filing your taxes correctly, okay? I know students that were like on F1, they have a different tax requirement. But if you go from F1 to a permanent resident, your tax situation changes. So you want to make sure that you are doing your taxes correctly based on your current status as a permanent resident. Another requirement that a lot of people do not know about is that as a permanent resident, every single time that you move, you need to update USCIS and do a change of address with USCIS within 10 days of moving. Okay, US citizens do not have this requirement, but as a permanent resident, you will always have this requirement. So make sure that you are doing your change of address online. You can do it online. You don't have to do it on paper. It's not a big thing. Sometimes our clients will reach out to us and we will do it for them. But you need to make sure that you're doing it. As a permanent resident, you are not a citizen. You cannot vote. You cannot register to vote. Doing one of those things can lead to you not only losing your residency, but not being able to apply for citizenship, right? Because you are now claiming to be a US citizen when you are not. But guess what? If you got your green card, your residency through your marriage to a US citizen, and you and your US citizen spouse are still together, still building a life together, you can apply for US citizenship within 3 years of having your residency. And this is whether you have a 10-year residency card or a 2-year residency card. It starts when you got your first initial card. So you can apply for citizenship within 3 years if you are married to a US citizen. If you are not married to a US citizen, you need to wait the 5 years to apply for citizenship. But please, if you qualify and you know you want to be a US citizen, you know you may want to move to another country or be outside of the US for a long period of time, please apply for citizenship as soon as you qualify. If you are a man and you are between the ages of 18 and 26, you need to make sure that you are registering for selective service, okay? This is a requirement. You have to do it within 30 days of becoming a permanent resident or within 30 days of your 18th birthday. Super important because this can affect you when you go to apply for citizenship. Finally, let's talk about the part that people really want to know. Now that you are a permanent resident, you can actually file for certain family members. Namely, you can file for your spouse and your unmarried children, okay? Your unmarried children, it doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter if they have children of their own. As long as they are not married, you can file for them as a permanent resident. You don't have to wait till you're a citizen to file for them. Another reason that you should apply for US citizenship as soon as you qualify is that once you become a citizen, you can now file not just for your spouse, you can file for your children, all your children, including married ones. You can file for your parents, and you can file for your siblings. And finally, you can file for a fiancé. So you went from only filing for unmarried children and your spouse, now adding 3 additional: the parents, the siblings, and the fiancé. Oh, and all your children, including married ones. So yeah, those are the benefits that you now get as a permanent resident, and the caution that you need to take as well to make sure that you do not lose your residency. It is so important that as you're going through the green card process, or now that you have your residency, that you keep these things in mind. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button, comment your questions. I'm here to answer them. So make sure you put your questions in the comment. If you would like to schedule time with me, all my links are in the description to this video.